Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission is always the same. We take the source material you shared with us, the articles, the research, the critical analysis, and we distill it into the essential knowledge you need to be truly well-informed.
And today, we are attempting to lock down a literary giant who has spent his entire professional life trying to avoid the spotlight.
We are diving deep into the sources, detailing the life and work of John Maxwell Coetzee.
Yes. And the sheer weight of his recognition, I mean, a Nobel laureate, the first person to win the Booker Prize twice, it's just staggering.
It is, especially when you consider his very deliberate, self-imposed retreat from public life. He is this architect of modern moral fiction, but our sources show he is just defined by profound tensions.
Tensions is the perfect word, between South Africa and Australia, between English and Africans.
And between the analytical rigor of mathematics and the fluidity of literature.
Exactly. That tension is the central puzzle piece we need to understand. How did this deeply complex personal history, from his very surprising ancestry to his wildly unconventional early career, how did that shape a writer who obsesses over morality, political failure, and the inherent dilemma of the outsider?
And our source material gives us this rich, almost encyclopedic view. So our goal is to connect these seemingly disparate biographical dots into, hopefully, a cohesive portrait of a singular critical voice.
Well, Coetzee's bibliography and his biography they're just intrinsically linked. He holds a list of international accolades that is almost unparalleled, and yet he consistently refuses the mantle of celebrity.
Right.
This deliberate alienation, it's not just a personal quirk, it's the philosophical foundation for his work. His life is a study in navigating these conflicting national and intellectual identities, which makes him the perfect subject for exploring alienation and duality.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Cape Town, 1940. He was born to Afrikaner parents, but immediately you see this split. His father was an attorney, his mother a school teacher, and they primarily spoke English at home. It was only when interacting with relatives that Afrikaners really entered the conversation.
And that initial linguistic split means Coetzee was immediately placed in a space of linguistic and cultural ambiguity within his own community.
Yeah.
That ambiguity is critical. I mean, in the racially and linguistically charged atmosphere of mid-century South Africa, choosing which language dominated the home was a profound statement, or at the very least, a profound inheritance.
Coetzee grew up with all the cultural markers of Afrikanerdom.
Right, but operating primarily in the language of the colonial power English. This placed him on the periphery of both camps from day one.
And the roots go even deeper, don't they? They reveal this even more complex tapestry of identity.
Oh, absolutely. His lineage extends far beyond the simple Dutch Afrikaner narrative. While his father's side descended from 17th century Dutch immigrants, his mother's heritage included German, Dutch, and really surprisingly, Polish immigrants.
That Polish connection is fascinating, and it speaks to the value of the source material in uncovering these hidden influences.
It's central. We learn that his maternal great-grandfather, Balcer Dubiel, and his name was later Germanized, he was born in Zarnalis, Poland in 1844.
And this isn't just a bit of trivia, is it?
Not at all. The source highlights that this ancestry directly led to a lifelong preoccupation with Polish literature and culture.
Which provides so much context for his later works. His 2022 novel, The Pole, which is about a Polish pianist, suddenly makes perfect sense. You realize this is a long-hidden ancestral thread feeding directly into his creative output decades and decades later.
It's a powerful illustration of how profoundly writers synthesize these diverse, often conflicting personal narratives into their fiction.
But before he was translating these complex cultural anxieties into novels, he was focused on logic, on structure.
Right. He attended St. Joseph's College and then the University of Cape Town, UCT, which is where his intellectual breadth really became apparent. He earned undergraduate degrees in both English in 1960 and in mathematics in 1961.
That dual background is the ultimate aha moment for understanding his prose style.
Yes.
It explains why his fiction, even when it's dealing with immense emotional cruelty, maintains this almost cold, measured, and structurally rigorous quality. He has the fluid, descriptive capacity of an English scholar.
But filtered through the analytical, problem-solving mind of a mathematician.
Exactly.
The mathematical training provides the analytical skeleton for his entire philosophical project. I mean, you think of novels like Waiting for the Barbarians or Disgrace. They function almost like ethical proofs.
Ethical proofs, I like that.
They isolate a moral dilemma and meticulously strip away the comfort of social norms until the core ethical failure is just exposed. It's literary minimalism informed by analytical rigor.
So after his BAs, he did an MA thesis on Ford Madox Ford in 1963, which signals, continued commitment to English literature. But then came this huge left turn.
The computer programmer years?
Between 1962 and 1965, he moved to the UK, worked for IBM in London, and then for ICT International Computers and Tabulators in Bracknell.
It's a remarkable interlude. It places the future Nobel Laureate not in an ivory tower or a garret, but in the nascent world of corporate technology, dealing with algorithms and punch cards.
He was a highly technical, specialized employee in a foreign land, and this experience was so defining that he later fictionalized it in his memoir Youth.
Right. In Youth, he documents these feelings of alienation. He describes himself as feeling like a colonial while living in London.
And that's a crucial piece of the puzzle, isn't it? He's in the heart of the empire, but he feels intrinsically foreign. It reinforces that identity as an outsider that just permeates all his future work.
He's geographically displaced and professionally specialized, applying a scientific discipline to a burgeoning industry.
Yeah, that analytical approach required for programming, the impersonal logic, the structure, finding solutions within these constrained parameters.
It would serve him so well when constructing his deeply critical novels. He spent 4 years translating messy human demands into pure structured logic.
And when he turned that same meticulous focus onto the messy, irrational world of human ethics, the results were just devastatingly clear and structured.
So we have this analytical, mathematical brain steeped in the tensions of colonial heritage, suddenly shifting gears. What ultimately prompted him to abandon the corporate technological world and pursue the academic track in the United States?
Well, that shift came in 1965. He moved to the University of Texas at Austin to pursue his PhD.
And while his coursework touched on things like bibliography and Old English, his dissertation remained intensely analytical. It really showcased that intersection of math and literature we were just talking about.
Okay, let's elaborate on that dissertation. His PhD, awarded in 1969, was a computer-aided stylistic analysis of the English prose of Samuel Beckett. Now, for you listening, if you're not deep in literary academia, what does computer-aided stylistic analysis actually tell us that traditional critique misses?
That's a key question.
And why Beckett, of all people?
Well, traditional critique focuses on meaning, emotion, narrative. A computer-aided analysis is concerned with quantifiable structure.
Okay.
Word frequency, sentence length variation, lexical density, rhythmic patterns. He wasn't just reading Beckett, he was mathematically decoding Beckett's unique architecture of alienation. He was quantifying the structure of despair.
So it's the ultimate expression of his dual intellect, applying cold, hard data to one of literature's most emotionally desolate and abstract figures.
And since Beckett himself was fundamentally concerned with the failure of language to communicate.
Coetzee was using technology to measure that failure.
Precisely. And this intellectual rigor extended beyond English. During this time, he also published a linguistic paper on the morphology of Nama, Malay, and Dutch languages. He was operating across multiple linguistic spheres, always analyzing the structure of communication.
And just a small note, while we're on his time in Texas, it's worth noting the clarification in our sources. He has stated very clearly he was not a Fulbright scholar, contrary to many reports.
Right. Again, just showing his quiet, factual corrective to public narratives about his life.
So, moving from Texas, he started teaching English literature at the State University of New York, SUNY, at Buffalo in 1968. And this period was pivotal.
It was, not just because it's where he began writing his first novel, Dusklands,
but because it brought him into direct and very costly political conflict.
This political confrontation is absolutely essential for understanding his later distrust of institutions. His attempt to gain permanent U.S. residency was ultimately unsuccessful, and the sources explicitly state this was partly due to his intense involvement in anti-Vietnam War protests.
And this is where his moral conviction translated into direct action. We have this really vivid anecdote from March 1970. Coetzee was one of 45 faculty members arrested for criminal trespass after occupying Hayes Hall at the university as part of these protests.
It's a powerful illustration. Here you have the highly analytical, somewhat reserved academic, willing to risk his legal status, his career security, to stand against a system he considered morally bankrupt, the U.S. involvement in Vietnam.
And even though the charges were dropped in 1971, the fact that this political entanglement contributed to the denial of his residency It demonstrates a crucial point.
That the American political system literally rejected him because of his moral protests.
Exactly. That rejection solidified the identity of the political outsider. Unable to secure permanent residency, he was forced back to South Africa, a country he was already deeply alienated from due to his upbringing and his views on apartheid.
His initial foray into the international academic world ended not with scholarly success, but with political expulsion.
So Coetzee returns to the University of Cape Town in 1972, and he would stay there for the next 3 decades, really establishing himself as a foundational figure in South African letters.
He steadily rose through the ranks, professor of general literature in 1984, distinguished professor by 1999.
In this period, teaching and researching under the oppressive weight of apartheid and then during the transition to democracy, this is what produced his most celebrated novels.
It is. Yet, in 2002, he made another major and final geographic shift, moving to Adelaide, Australia, becoming an Australian citizen in 2006.
Why the move? Especially after the celebrated end of apartheid.
Well, the reason he cited was highly contentious. He publicly stated that the South African government's lax attitude toward crime and endemic violence was a driving factor in his departure.
And this resulted in a very public, very heated disagreement with the then-president, Thabo Mbeki.
That exchange made international news, and it really highlights the deep sensitivity around national critique. Mbeki famously fired back, referencing Coetzee's second Booker-winning novel, Disgrace.
Right, he said, South Africa is not only a place of rape.
And that exchange just illustrates the price Coetzee paid for his critical truth. Disgrace is often read as an allegory for the failures of post-apartheid reconciliation, focusing on violence and moral collapse.
So Mbeki's comment was an attempt to dismiss Coetzee's critique as distorted, overly focused on the negative, and failing to see the new nation's achievements.
Right. And it's important to understand the historical context here. The African National Congress, the ANC itself, had submitted an argument to a Human Rights Commission investigation, claiming that Disgrace depicted racist stereotypes.
So Coetzee was facing friction not just from the old Afrikaner establishment, but now from the new democratic government he had theoretically helped usher in.
He was, again, positioned as the outsider, critically distant from the reigning political orthodoxy.
But crucially, Coetzee offered a more nuanced clarification about his move, didn't he? He avoided the language of flight or pure rejection.
He did. He emphasized that he did not so much leave South Africa, but come to Australia. He said he was drawn by the free and generous spirit of the people and the grace of the city that I now have the honor of calling my home.
That framing, choosing to embrace a new identity rather than solely fleeing the old one, that's vital. It emphasizes the agency of the intellectual outsider.
He was seeking a calmer, more predictable environment where he could continue his intense moral exploration rather than constantly fighting political battles on his home turf.
And Australia embraced him fully. While he maintained strong emotional ties to South Africa, he even received the prestigious Order of Mapungubwe in 2005 for putting the country on the world stage. His commitment to Australia is clear.
Absolutely. He was appointed a Companion of the Order of Australia in 2025, and he's the patron of the J.M. Coetzee Centre for Creative Practice at the University of Adelaide. He didn't just relocate, he integrated and became a foundational figure in another national literature.
Let's shift our focus to the writing itself, which, despite his personal reclusiveness, brought him this unprecedented official recognition. His career is just marked by milestones that few authors ever touch.
And the defining metric of his pre-Nobel career was his mastery of the Booker Prize. Coetzee was the first writer in history to win the prestigious award twice.
Right. His first win came relatively early in his career in 1983 for Life and Times of Michael Kay, a novel that's often praised for its political subtlety and narrative detachment.
And his second win followed 16 years later in 1999.
For Disgrace.
For Disgrace, right, which just became this global flashpoint for its unflinching portrayal of post-apartheid trauma. Winning the Booker twice was a massive achievement at the time.
Yeah, to emphasize the scale of that, it wasn't until the 2000s that others, Peter Carey, Hilary Mantel, and later Margaret Atwood, achieved the same feat.
He set the standard for sustained excellence over decades. In fact, he almost made it an unprecedented triple win in 2009 when his memoir novel Summertime was longlisted and highly favored.
Which just showcases the consistent draw his work has for critical juries.
Yeah.
His consistency in garnering attention is remarkable. Beyond the wins, his works were longlisted multiple times. Elizabeth Costello in 2003, Slow Man in 2005, and The School Days of Jesus in 2016.
This demonstrates not just a high quality of writing, but a career spent constantly pushing boundaries and challenging expectations, always landing him squarely in the international conversation.
And yet, this massive public recognition is juxtaposed with his legendary reclusiveness. The sources describe his public image as one of monkish self-discipline.
He notoriously avoids ceremonies. He did not collect either of his 2 Booker Prizes in person.
That behavioral pattern is so fascinating. It suggests a profound separation between the creative act and the ensuing public spectacle.
I think so. Does he see the celebration as a distraction from the work itself? Or maybe he views the mechanism of awards, the competitive nationalistic framing, as inherently incompatible with the serious moral work he's doing?
It's probably both.
I think it's both. The acceptance of the 1987 Jerusalem Prize for the Freedom of the Individual in Society offers a key insight into his approach. While he avoided the celebrity, he used the formal platform of the awards ceremony to make a direct political statement about the context of his writing.
And what was that statement?
He spoke of South African literature being a literature in bondage, a very harsh assessment that rejected the idea of literature as mere escapism. He argued that the political structures of apartheid created deformed and stunted relations between human beings, and the literature produced under that regime carried that burden.
So he was using the prize not as an endorsement of himself, but as a megaphone for political critique.
Exactly.
And then the ultimate confirmation of his global status arrived in 2003 with the Nobel Prize in Literature,
Making him the 4th African writer and the 2nd South African after Nadine Gordimer to receive the honor. And the Swedish Academy's citation, it basically codified the critical themes of his entire career.
It did. The Academy focused heavily on the moral depth and complexity of his characterizations. They noted that he, in innumerable guises, portrays the surprising involvement of the outsider.
Which confirms that the identity we traced from his childhood, the linguistically ambiguous, politically rejected, mathematically rigorous individual, is the identity that informs his greatest literary strength.
And the Academy didn't ignore his technique either. They specifically praised his well-crafted composition, pregnant dialogue, and analytical brilliance.
That phrase, analytical brilliance, is the direct link back to that 1961 mathematics degree and the computer-aided Beckett thesis. His writing is rigorous, structured, and emotionally devastating, precisely because of that analytical distance.
The Nobel cemented his position as a major moral voice on the global stage. It meant that his explorations of human cruelty, institutional failure, and the ethical responsibilities of individuals could no longer be confined to national or regional literary categories.
They had become universal concerns, delivered with structural precision.
And beyond the giants of the Nobel and the Booker, the sheer breadth of his recognition highlights how consistently he's been admired by critics across borders. He won the CNA Literary Award 3 times. His early work, Waiting for the Barbarians, secured both the James Tate Black Memorial Prize and the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize.
And globally, he was recognized in France with the Prix Femina Étranger. His works consistently dominated regional categories, like the Commonwealth Writers' Prizes for the African region, which he won for Disgrace in 2000.
And that specific award was personally presented by Queen Elizabeth II at Buckingham Palace.
Which is an ironic moment, isn't it, for a man who felt like a colonial in London, now being honored by the symbolic head of the former empire.
Let's go back to South Africa's acknowledgement. Despite the public friction with Mbeki and his departure for Australia, the South African government awarded him the Order of Mapungubwe Gold Class in 2005.
They cited his exceptional contribution in the field of literature and for putting South Africa on the world stage.
That gesture is profound. It demonstrates that the nation recognized his vital importance to its identity, even if it wrestled with the content of his critiques.
It was a formal acknowledgement that Coetzee's role was fundamentally nation-defining, regardless of his geographical location or political opposition.
And his adopted home, Australia, has ensured his influence remains strong. His appointment as a companion of the Order of Australia and his role as patron of the J.M. Coetzee Centre for Creative Practice confirms his deep integration into Australian academia and cultural life.
He has a stable base from which he continues his work.
Okay, so we've established Coetzee's foundational identity as this dualistic, analytical outsider. Now let's look at how that translated into a definitive shift in his writing strategy after 1999.
The sheer volume of his work is impressive, but critics point to a crucial pivot away from traditional narrative. Since the publication of Disgrace in 1999, the sources confirm a definite and deliberate move away from what is termed naturalistic storytelling fiction.
And for you listening, naturalistic fiction is typically characterized by detailed realism, strong plot lines, and conventional character arcs like his earlier South African set novels.
Right.
So what did he move toward?
He transitioned toward more hybrid, abstract forms. Essays presented as fiction, polemics embedded in dialogue, and memoir contained within a fictional framework.
This shift allowed him to bypass the limitations of realism and engage directly with abstract philosophical debate.
Right. He uses the form of the novel less for storytelling and more for rigorous ethical interrogation.
And this transition introduced the frequent use of alter egos, turning his fiction into what James Meek described as an intimate conversation he's having with himself.
That's a perfect description. It feels like a strategic move to critique and test his own ideas without committing to a nonfiction stance.
Precisely. We can categorize these alter egos into three distinct types, all designed to embody different facets of Coetzee's critique. First, there's the world-weary male academic or magistrate, like David Lurie in Disgrace.
These characters are usually placed under immense ethical duress, forced to confront societal failures and their own moral decay.
The second is maybe the most fascinating. The female proxy, the elderly, scholarly, world-weary novelist Elizabeth Costello.
A recurring character who serves as a philosophical mouthpiece, delivering powerful, often uncomfortable lectures on topics like vegetarianism, animal rights, and the nature of evil.
So why use a female proxy, and an elderly one at that?
Well, it creates distance and authority. By putting his most potent philosophical arguments into the mouth of a fictional, older woman, he achieves several things. He avoids the immediate charge of male autobiography.
Sure.
He gives the ideas a distinct, often abrasive voice, separate from his own public persona. And he leverages the moral authority, often ascribed to the figure of the elder intellectual woman. It's a mechanism for polemic cloaked in fiction.
And the third type is Coetzee himself, writing autobiographically in works like Boyhood, Youth, and Summertime. The source notes that he is often harsh on himself in these characters.
And this is not autobiography designed to stroke the ego. It is self-critique as literature. By fictionalizing and often lampooning the character named Coetzee, he subjects his own life and choices to the same analytical scrutiny he applies to his fictional protagonists.
And this strategy highlights his commitment to operating as a global linguistic and literary outsider, constantly testing the moral limits of his own experiences, like feeling like a colonial when living in London, as captured in Youth.
This relentless self-critique leads us directly to his lifelong preoccupation with language itself. Specifically, his profound resistance to the global dominance, the hegemony of English.
So how does one of the most celebrated writers in English articulate resistance to the language that brought him global liberation?
It's the ultimate paradox. He expresses strong antagonism toward the arrogance that comes with English being the global lingua franca. He stated explicitly, "I do not like the way in which English is taking over the world."
I mean, that's a staggering declaration.
It is. He continues, "I don't like the arrogance that this situation breeds in its native speakers. Therefore, I do what little I can to resist the hegemony of the English language."
So he's using the global medium to fight the global power. And is he seeking a kind of linguistic purity? Or is he just highlighting the political and cultural cost of monolingual dominance?
It's about the cost of cultural dominance. He gained his liberation through English. It allowed him to speak to the world beyond South Africa, yet he feels constantly uneasy with its power. He described his command of English as feeling like the kind of command that a foreigner might have, even though he's a native speaker.
So this alienation means he views English, the very language he uses for his art, as a loaded political tool that must be handled with suspicion and care.
This language conflict drove him toward tangible activism in the literary world, leading to his ambitious Literatures of the South project. We know he studied Spanish early on, which reflects a broader interest in non-English voices.
Yes, and his long-standing intellectual interest in Southern Hemisphere perspectives crystallized into a major academic and publishing initiative. From 2015 to 2018, he directed a biannual seminar series, the Cátedra Coetzee, at a university in Argentina.
This project focused on comparative perspectives between Southern Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and South America.
So this was a deliberate effort to establish intellectual connections in a critical framework that bypassed the traditional North American and European literary centers. It's an active way of creating a new literary map.
Exactly. It attempts to recenter the conversation, shifting critical attention to common historical and post-colonial experiences shared by countries in the Southern Hemisphere. It's an intellectual resistance movement against the North's perceived monopoly on critical theory and literary history.
And he backed this intellectual commitment with his personal publishing strategy. His later works, including the Jesus trilogy and his 2023 novel The Pole,
They reflect this. He deliberately chose to publish these works first in the South, in Australia and Argentina, before they appeared in the UK or US.
and this is perhaps his most powerful and symbolic act of resistance. It's a practical, economic, and cultural move that leverages his global influence. He is forcing the Western literary world to receive his work from the South rather than dictating its reception from London or New York.
And he was very intentional about this. He stated plainly, "The symbolism of publishing in the South before the North is important to me."
It's a powerful, final statement of intent for a writer who has spent his life wrestling with cultural power dynamics. He uses his platform to validate and elevate Southern literary voices and markets.
So Coetzee may be alienated by all political language, but he is certainly not politically inert. His fiction and his commentary serve as powerful instruments of ethical critique. Let's delve into how he engaged with major political and moral flashpoints.
Starting with South African politics, he, alongside writers like Andre Brink and Brighton Breitenbach, was a crucial voice in the anti-apartheid movement within Afrikaner literature.
As he noted in his 1987 Jerusalem Prize speech, he felt the moral burden of the regime deeply, describing the literature it produced as fundamentally in bondage.
And after the transition to democracy, his novel Disgrace became instantly controversial. It was interpreted by many as an allegory for South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC.
Given that the TRC was viewed internationally as a crucial step toward national healing, it's interesting to see how Coetzee viewed it.
Which was how?
Well, his view was typically guarded and critical. He described the TRC as somewhat anomalous, a court of a certain kind based to a large degree on Christian teaching.
And he went on to suggest that the moral framework underpinning it was accepted in their hearts by only a tiny proportion of the citizenry.
That is a deep and profound critique of the institutional solution. He wasn't necessarily criticizing the intent of reconciliation, but the method. He was questioning whether a process rooted in specific culturally derived concepts like Christian forgiveness could genuinely resolve profound secular structural injustice in a diverse society.
It speaks to his deep intellectual skepticism of any institution that claims universal moral authority.
This critical distance defines his overall political stance. He avoids specified political orientations, stating that he is alienated by all political language, in fact.
He rejects the binary entirely. He avoids the right, having seen enough of the Afrikaner right.
But feels there is no longer a left worth speaking of. He finds political rhetoric, especially with its recent economistic bent, even more repellent than it was decades ago.
This stance allows him the intellectual freedom to apply his analytical brilliance to systems without being compromised by party allegiance. He operates in the space of pure critique, outside the traditional political spectrum.
This critical distance, however, does not make him silent. When fundamental moral lines are crossed globally, he intervenes with devastating clarity. In 2005, he delivered a shocking and widely publicized criticism of contemporary anti-terrorism laws being adopted in Western democracies.
The analogy he drew was incredibly harsh and deliberately provocative.
It was. He stated that these new anti-terrorism laws, which often involve surveillance and the suspension of habeas corpus, were disturbingly similar to the oppressive legal framework of the apartheid state.
The source material gives us the exact quote, and it pulls no punches. He said, "I used to think that the people who created South Africa's laws that effectively suspended the rule of law were moral barbarians. Now I know they were just pioneers ahead of their time."
That quote demands reflection. He is essentially accusing modern Western governments of utilizing methods of control and legal abuse that were perfected by one of the most reviled regimes of the 20th century.
By calling the architects of apartheid pioneers, he reframes them not as historical villains, but as precursors to current global security states.
It's a mechanism for moral reckoning, forcing his audience to feel the full weight of the comparison.
And his move to Australia didn't dull his ethical lens on his new country either. He became a strong voice against Australia's immigration policies.
Right. In 2016, he was a signatory to a letter condemning the government's controversial policy of offshore detention for asylum seekers, labeling those policies brutal and shameful.
He is consistent. Whether the abuse of power is found in the U.S., South Africa, or Australia, his critical focus remains the same.
The systemic cruelty enacted by the state against the vulnerable.
We also see this strategic use of language in his commentary on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When he was attending the Palestine Festival of Literature in 2016, he was careful to avoid using the word apartheid.
He argued that the term itself had become so loaded that it diverts one into the inflamed semantic wrangle.
This is the mathematician in him again. Choosing the language that facilitates the clearest analysis. He recognized that using the term apartheid would immediately shift the discussion away from the facts and into a highly emotional semantic battle over definition.
He chose instead to provide an analytical description of the lived reality.
So what language did he use to describe the situation in Jerusalem and the West Bank, allowing him to bypass the semantic controversy?
He opted for a clinical descriptive analysis. He called it a system of enforced segregation based on religion and ethnicity, put in place by an exclusive self-defined group to consolidate the colonial conquest.
In particular, to maintain and indeed extend its hold on the land and its natural resources.
By focusing on concepts like enforced segregation, colonial conquest, and natural resources, he delivers a powerful critique without getting bogged down in the politically toxic debate surrounding a single charged term.
Now, perhaps the most sustained and visible moral cause championed by Coetzee, and one explicitly woven into his fiction, is animal rights.
Absolutely. He is a passionate advocate and a dedicated vegetarian. This moral stance is central to his later work, elevating the ethics of human-animal interaction to the same level of intellectual seriousness as political oppression or colonial cruelty. Since 2004, he has served as a patron for the Australian animal protection organization, Voiceless.
His works actively confront the reader's complicity in industrialized suffering. The Lives of Animals, Disgrace, Elizabeth Costello, even shorter pieces like The Old Woman and the Cats, all utilize narrative distance or philosophical polemic to force a confrontation with animal cruelty.
In many ways, the suffering animal becomes the ultimate outsider in his moral universe.
And this wasn't just a literary stance. He translated it into direct institutional activism. We have that striking anecdote from 2008 where he intervened at the behest of fellow novelist John Banville to protest Trinity College. Dublin's continued use of vivisection on animals for scientific research.
He issued a public statement that was typically direct and morally uncompromising. He stated clearly, "There is no good reason, in fact, there has never been any good reason, scientific or pedagogical, to require students to cut up living animals. Trinity College brings shame on itself by continuing with the practice."
He positioned the practice not just as scientifically outdated, but as morally shameful, linking the institution's reputation directly to its ethical choices.
What's particularly compelling and, well, tragic about this anecdote is the follow-up. The source notes that years later, in 2017, the practice not only persisted, but actually increased.
Trinity used approximately 3,000 rats and 21,000 mice in 2016 alone. Banville admitted their efforts had been to no avail.
This detail just highlights the sheer difficulty of translating moral authority, even that of a Nobel Laureate, into institutional change against entrenched scientific and bureaucratic structures. The moral argument was clear, but the resistance was overwhelming.
And this frustration with institutional stagnation eventually drove him to attempt to engage the political system directly on this issue. In 2014, he attempted to become a candidate for the Dutch Party for the animals in the European Parliament election.
This shows the depth of his commitment. He was attempting to transform his literary moral authority into tangible political representation.
But his attempt failed due to bureaucratic constraints. His candidacy was rejected by the Dutch election board because he couldn't prove legal residency within the European Union.
That failure encapsulates the recurring theme of his life, doesn't it? The moral clarity of the intellectual outsider constantly hitting the wall of political and institutional reality.
Whether it's the U.S. residency system, the post-apartheid government, or the EU's bureaucratic hurdles. This has been an incredibly deep and nuanced exploration of a truly singular intellect. Let's try to synthesize the essential paradox of J.M. Coetzee.
Okay.
He's a computer scientist who used analytical brilliance to craft humanist fiction.
The double Booker winner who maintains a monkish self-discipline and avoids the public stage.
The South African writer who became a determined Australian voice, and the moralist who is completely repelled by political language.
He is the living embodiment of the Swedish Academy's citation, the man who, in innumerable guises, portrays the surprising involvement of the outsider. His life, from his dual ancestry and his mathematical training to his self-imposed exile and his stylistic shift away from naturalism, demonstrates a strategic commitment to occupying the fringes.
So the essential takeaway for you, the learner, is the value of critical distance. Coetzee's journey shows us that intense, sustained critical engagement often requires stepping back.
Physically, by moving continents to avoid political compromise; formally, by constantly shifting genres to avoid stylistic complacency; and linguistically, by questioning the very language used for power and political debate.
His biography is a testament to the fact that the most profound insights into human morality and systemic injustice rarely come from those who are comfortably seated at the center of power or culture.
They come from those who, like Coetzee, choose, or are forced, to position themselves deliberately on the fringes, refusing the easy comfort of belonging so that they might see the system with clear, analytical eyes.
I think we have to end where he lands, right on that tension between language and polemic. Coetzee, writing about himself, once noted he was alienated by all political language, in fact.
Right.
Yet he continues to write powerful polemics, whether disguised as the lectures of Elizabeth Costello or as raw, unflinching fiction. So the language of politics is inherently repellent and corrupted if it breeds arrogance and obscures truth. What responsibility does a successful writer have to subvert that language to force a moral reckoning?
What alternative form can ethical communication take when conventional political channels, like running for the European Parliament, fail entirely?
That is the question. Coetzee's life and his relentless work leaves us to ponder.